Thank you guys for joining us again. Today we're here to shed a little light on what we expect out in Verify 25.4.1. The first thing I'm going to go ahead and start off with is a one of our larger projects. This was came from demand from a lot of our current customer base, as well as a lot of our current customer base that are kind of moving over to a different cloud-based platform. In this particular case, we're going to talk a little bit about DID management for MS Teams. Um, so what is DID management? Those that are familiar with it, from the call manager perspective, it's really a way of being able to kind of understand what DIDs you own versus which ones are in use, which ones are provisioned. From a call manager perspective, it's both what's kind of active, what's inactive, but also what's available. In other words, I own 10,000 DIDs from my carrier. Which ones are used and in use, and where are they in use? So those that are familiar with this from the call manager perspective, we really rolled a lot of the same packaging into our MS Teams offering. So what does that mean? One of the first things you're going to notice is when I pop in here, from the DID management perspective, is there is no gear over here to be able to switch clusters. The huge benefit of DID management, especially with a lot of our customers that are currently doing migrations or running hybrid environments where they have both a call manager and maybe an MS Teams environment, is the ability to not only see, excuse me, what DIDs they currently have in place on their call manager, also what DIDs they have or are used or are provisioned on their MS Teams, but see those together. So one of the big things we try to do is we like to make life simple for folks. So with our DID management, it is what we like to call cross-platform. In other words, my searches, my DID blocks, my DID sites can all search and be cross-platform. So let's take a quick peek at that. So from my DID, I have both my CUCM site and my MS Teams site. I just did this for clarity. It just makes it simpler. And a lot of our customers, they already have DID with CUCM, so they already have sites built, and they already have blocks built. So they're just adding their MS Teams, but they want to be able to keep track of what's provisioned where. So with that, we can go ahead and simply, rather than having to choose one or choose two or multiple sites, I can simply click all my sites. I want to see all the sites in my query here. And I have my various blocks. Some of these are Teams-based blocks. Some of these are call manager-based blocks. For this particular sample and this demonstration here, I don't really care. I just want to be able to say, hey, out of this particular range of DNs or DIDs, which ones are in use? Which ones are not in use? Which ones are provisioned where? So we're going to take all the guesswork out of it for this demonstration. We're just going to search all of our blocks. We're going to search all of our DIDs, and I'm going to look for anything in my 7,000 range or my 7,100 range. And for this example, I'm going to start off by showing just inactive and active. So in other words, I just want to see things that are provisioned and active in both my call manager and my MS Teams that are fit my range. But I also want to see things that are inactive in both my call manager and my MS Teams environment. Inactive from a call manager perspective is pretty straightforward. We're looking at things that are DIDs that are maybe provisioned, but they don't have any devices associated to it. Maybe a device got deleted or removed, or an employee is no longer with the company, but the particular DN or DID never got cleaned up. That's something that's an inactive. Now, popular to contrary belief, you can also have a lot of inactive in your Teams environment. Those are DIDs that you've programmed into your Microsoft Teams environment, but aren't active. They're not associated to any particular user or device. So you can actually have both. But through this search, what I'm showing you here is I'm looking at all my 700 range. And essentially what I'm seeing is I get to see my MS Teams side of the house. I get to see what's active. If I scroll off to the right, I'll get to see who the system belongs to or who that particular DID is belonging to, along with a lot of other information here that is all really MS Teams related. And then you're also going to notice some CUCM information. I have both a 704 and a 704 in my Teams environment and my CUCM environment. Now, the nice thing is I am looking at different area codes and prefixes. So these are on different carriers. So that's helping me identify which particular carrier each one of these is associated to. Now, if both of these were my MS Teams environment and my CUCM, and they were the 618781, we are going to show both of those. We're going to see your MS Teams one. We're going to see your CUCM one. Hopefully your CUCM one is deactivated or inactive, letting you know that, hey, this is something that's been carried over, but this is also a great way to be able to help identify what has been carried over. If I want to, I can go ahead and custom tag something like this is my MS Teams one. I could say carried from CUCM and add that in there. And I don't worry about my spelling here. I'm just kind of rushing through this to make sure we get to everything. And now I've tagged that. I can do the same thing for my CUCM ones. I could either tag full on blocks or I could tag individual ones, hold for CUCM or hold for MS Teams migration, or I can put something like, migrate on, whoops, if I was typing, and we'll say 5.7. And add that on there. And then I can go ahead and search off of those lists, search off of those tags. But the idea here is giving you both of those pictures in one. So now you're able to see what do you have going on in your call manager? What do you have going on in your MS Teams environment? And if you don't have call manager, or you just care about your MS Teams environment, that's no problem at all. You're going to get that same searchability based off the site. For me, I know this is my MS Teams site. This is housing all of my MS Teams blocks. So I can see both of my MS Teams blocks, and we'll switch gears here a little bit, and we'll switch our 2200 range. Again, just strictly looking at my MS Teams block, view those. I'm going to be able to see what's inactive and active. And now, again, I'm just looking at my MS Teams block for that particular area code and prefix. Now, great. Again, maybe I want to see what else can be provisioned. We've got a large number of here that could still be provisioned. So now I'm looking at everything that is available. Available being, hey, this is what I have. This is what I own from my carrier. This is what I purchased. Now I need to go ahead and start putting these into place in my MS Teams system. So we are excited to get DID out the door. Huge kudos to all of our development team, our QA team, our product team for putting this together. We've got great feedback from our customers that have been trialing this. To Trey's point, get involved with the early access. A lot of this is built from a lot of what our customers have recommended. So being involved with those early access programs is not just a benefit for us, but it's a huge benefit for our customers because we're really able to build around what you guys need to be able to see. Right. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and schedule and talk a little bit about. And if you want more information on DID, make sure you follow us next week and join the webinar next week. My good friend Jim Schultens is going to be doing a webinar on DID management. That's going to get into configuring the blocks and a little bit more usage than we have time today for. All right. So the next thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is licensing. This is following our same line along with our MS Teams licensing. We worked with a lot of our customers, and what we see with a lot of our customers, especially when we talk about healthcare, education, finance, Microsoft has a lot of licensing options, a lot of licensing options, more than we can really keep track of for the most part. So one of the things that we saw a lot with our education and healthcare were what I'll call like an education license or a financial license. And what that does is it basically gives you the ability to have MS Teams for everybody in your organization. So that could be thousands of licenses. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you had MS Teams phone assigned to everybody. In other words, they can't place inbound and outbound calls, but they have a license for MS Teams. So our license originally would predominantly look at all of the users that have an MS Teams license because it gives them the capability of having a phone. Now, working with a lot of our customers, we realized that, hey, just having an MS Teams license doesn't necessarily mean you gave those people phones. Especially when we talk about education, we work with a lot of school systems, and they have education license. And everybody within that school system, 50, 60,000 people, may have an MS Teams license, but they weren't necessarily giving everybody an MS Teams phone. So working with a lot of our customers, we found that there are multiple ways to give people the ability to have an MS Teams license, but not necessarily giving them the ability to place inbound and outbound calls. Yes, they can still call internally, but they didn't necessarily have outbound and internal access. So with that, we had a lot of our existing customers come and say, well, you know what, look, the license is larger than what we really need because all of these other people, yes, they have an MS Teams phone license, but we haven't enabled phone for them. And much like everything in the world today, there's a million different ways to do the same exact thing. So working with our partners, we found out, this is how people are omitting phones from an actual person. So I can give Trey an MS Teams license, but say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and restrict him so he can't have the phone portion. Or maybe he can have phone, but he can only place internal calls. So we have updated our licensing to better represent the actual licensing of a user that can place inbound and outbound calls. So we've been working with a lot of our customers, what we'll call creatively, and making sure that we're, from a licensing perspective, they're only being billed for what they were able to use. But based on our work with those customers, and again, thank you for everybody that coordinated with us and helped us out. Thank you to our product team and our customers. We were able to go ahead and really dig into the multiple ways that you can restrict a user's phone access and come up with a better licensing policy for you guys. So you're going to notice a license in your VLR. Some of the counts may change for your MS Teams. We are looking at license SKUs. There are a certain amount of SKUs that we're looking at. Now, again, there's multiple ways to get to these SKUs by disabling and enabling certain things within your team's environment. So we've done a great job with all of our customers and partners to identify each way I can restrict a person's phone and really bill and license based off of those particular models. So we can see right here, I'm looking at MCO cap, which is a type of MS Teams license. That's basically just means it's a Microsoft Communications Online Common Area Phone license. We do bill and we do license based off of common area phones. We've also got a business license. This is something that's unique to Variphy. And we're going to see a lot of other licenses out there like SPE E5s that are just enterprise license. But the idea here is now we're no longer looking at that Teams environment as a whole. We're looking more focused on those users that have Teams phone can place inbound and outbound calls. So this is a huge change for us, and it's just really going to make life easier for a lot of our customers when they were seeing 20,000 MS Teams license, but they're like, yeah, but only 5,000 people have MS Teams phone users. So that's a big change for us as far as license perspective. But again, providing you guys more information and more visibility on how your licenses are being used within your environment. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about is another change for MS Teams. And don't worry, this is not an all MS Teams program here. We're going to talk a little bit about some changes for WebEx and Zoom in a moment. One of the things that we've also changed with MS Teams is our ability to identify and count unique variables into call queues. That's the best way I can kind of put that. So what does that mean? That means those folks out there that have WebEx and Zoom and even Call Manager with us, our current environment for those, they consolidate calls into more, let's say, business-friendly metrics is the best way I can put it. So Microsoft comes out and every call that hits the queue, whether you answer it or don't answer it, if it just rings on you, it gets attributed to a call queue. So what we've done is we've actually recognized that, based on feedback from our customers, and what we've done with some of our other platforms is we give people the ability to now singularly identify calls into call queues. So let's say, for example, I'm running a call into my call queue, and I'm going to bring up a sample report just in the interest of time, and I'm going to bring up this guy here, and I'm going to show you a difference here between a version 12 or a version 25.2 and a version 25.4. This is the same report for the same exact call queue, and I'm using my new call queue for this one. We can see that we recognize 25 total calls into this call queue. That's not incorrect. 25 calls did hit this call queue, and the reason being is because every call that it rings on is a call into the call queue. So if it rings on me, it rings on my friend Jim, that's 2 calls into the call queue. However, us being an analytics vendor, we recognize that's not necessarily what people want to see. They don't necessarily want to see, hey, how many times did the call hit somebody in my call queue? They want to know how many calls came into the queue. And out of all of those calls that came into the queue, how many of those calls were answered? So in 25.2.2, you'll see that the total call counts were probably relatively higher. And the reason being is because we were doing what Microsoft gave us. We said, hey, here's a row. It says it hit the call queue. So that's a total call into the call queue. But being analytics vendors, we recognize what people send us versus what they want to see may be 2 different things. So rather than just counting row per row all the calls that go into the queue like you would get from something like a Power BI or some kind of data ingestion where you're just going to see row call queue count, we make a little bit more sense out of that data. So rather than looking at something as 25 calls into the call queue with an answer rate of 48%, again, this 48% averaging based off of these total 25 calls, we recognize that, you know what, that's not actually 25 inbound calls into the call queue. It's actually only 7 calls that came into the call queue, and 4 of those got answered. So our answer rate is actually at 57%. So rather than counting all the rows, row per row that we receive from Microsoft, we are actually digesting that information. We're correlating a lot of that information. We're building singular calls. Now, that's not going to change what you see in your cradle to grave. That's the benefit here, benefit of using a system like Variphy, is that we're still going to give you the full cradle to grave. You're going to see all those calls. You're going to see all those calls that go into the call queue. But what we're doing is we're providing you a better overall summary value. So yes, I can see how many calls came into Jim, and I can see how many calls Jim answered. That's going to go towards our answer count. But what I'm not going to do is overinflate that total count by counting all of the calls that just rang at Jim and saying, yep, that's a call into the queue. So this is a huge advantage for reporting. So again, another big change to 25.4.1 is, again, the ability to just kind of click on a button, run a report, and see those metrics, but how you want them, not necessarily how they were returned from Microsoft. Right. Another big one that we have here as far as changes, and again, I promise this will be the last one I talk about for Microsoft, and we'll move on to a couple other changes that we've got here for WebEx and Zoom, is going to be the ability to add call session failure. So what is call session failure? When we're talking about Microsoft, and let me go ahead and switch over to Microsoft here. Call session failure is the ability to see where a call may have failed. So this was something that we had in our detail before, but from a request from our customers, being able to delve into what calls are failing, where calls are failing, are they failing on particular people more than other people, was obviously an advantage that we recognized. So let's just do the last previous 30 days and see if I've got some calls. I'm fairly certain I do. This is going to give us the ability to just filter in on those calls that failed. So we can see all of the cradle to grave. If I scroll off to the right over here, let's see, we can add our session failure in there. I'm going to add both stage and reason because I like to see both. And we'll be able to see the calls that failed mid-call. Now, this is important because we want to be able to develop patterns on this. I have 9 calls in the past 30 days that failed. So this is something I may want to look at from an event perspective and say, you know what, is this a common problem with one particular participant? And I could see most of my calls are failing mid-calls. Some of them go about an hour, some of them about 45 minutes. But what it also gives me the ability to do is see the individual users that they're failing on, but then also sort and group reports so I can identify, hey, is this happening on one person more than another? Right. So that was another great addition to our MS Teams environment, as well as something new for 25.4.1. A couple other things I'm going to go ahead and talk about, and we're going to move over to our WebEx calling side of the house. I don't have a whole lot to show here because this was a change, and my lab has that change in. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is just run a quick report here, and I'm just going to do a very simple report. I'm not going to do this for the last 30 days because that'll give me an ungodly amount of data. Let's just do this for the current week and see what we get. We get a couple of calls, and that's perfect. That's all we need. So part of our WebEx calling is our cradle to grave, and everybody loves cradle to grave. They love to be able to see the calls from start to finish. What we found in working with WebEx and Cisco is that the identifiers that we should have been able to use to track a call from start to finish were actually changing based on certain types of transfer patterns. This did not happen for every transfer call, but certain types of transfers that may have routed through call queues, hunt groups, came to users, were transferred back to call queues, hunt groups, things like that, where they got much more complex. The IDs that we were originally reliant on were actually changing. So what we would see is you would see part of a cradle to grave call, and then if a certain type of transfer happened, it would actually create another cradle to grave call. Now, it wasn't causing problems with your summary values. Your summary values were normal because all of that was still included in your general report. But what it would do is it would actually break the cradle to grave. So what we've done is we've made some adjustments to our product so that way the cradle to grave, even during those complex transfers, is now going to carry through. It's really forced us to look at several different fields within the WebEx call data to really put a call together, because the initial fields that we were relying on we found that they just were not super reliant. So we worked with our Cisco partners and came up with a new way to be able to track these calls from start to finish. Again, not a lot to show here, but definitely an improvement for our WebEx calling folks. Next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is move over a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about Zoom. So for our Zoom folks out here, new in 25.4.1, and that is an invalid account. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up. It looks like I probably used my account somewhere else. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring up a sample of this report right here. And actually, let me bring this guy up. And that was the ability to add secondary grouping to our call queues. So call queues are huge. They're huge in Teams. They're huge in WebEx. They're huge in Zoom. They're huge in Call Manager. So one of the things that people wanted to see is the ability to show unassociated users in call queues. So what does that mean? So in this particular report, I'm running a report based off my site. In other words, I have a site, a main site, and most of my calls will come into my main site, and then some of them will go to queues. Some of them could go directly to different departments and different parts of my organization. So what people wanted to say is, you know, how many calls came into my site, and out of all those calls that came into the site, how many went to the queues, but also how many didn't. Now, you could do the math and say, okay, well, 48 minus the number of calls that went to this queue and the number of calls that went to this queue, that's the number of calls that didn't go to any queue at all. But you know what? Who wants to sit there and have to do math when I can just look at a report? So new to 25.4.1 is the ability to add the unassociated call queues to your, unassociated calls to your call queue. That's just a simple toggle when you're in your grouping. If you're grouping off of your main site like I am here, and you're adding your call queues, you now have the ability to see the no associated call queues. What this is identifying all of the calls that went into my main site but did not hit a call queue. So huge advantage, popular request from some of our Zoom customers. So we did add that into our 25.4.1 system here. Next thing I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about, and again, I don't have a ton of show and tell for this one, is going to be cradle to grave matching. Much like I just mentioned with our WebEx calling and the ability to see those calls all the way through, we did find complications that were very similar in the Zoom environment. In other words, some of the identifiers that we were relying on changed due to certain types of transfers. So we recognize this. We were able to get this quickly resolved. So it complements to our product team as well as our engineering team in digging out new ways to be able to kind of formulate these calls together. So you're going to see, again, much more complete cradle to grave than we were providing in the other ones. Again, the previous reports in either Zoom or WebEx were not incorrect. They were accurate. It's just that you didn't see the whole picture of the cradle to grave. In other words, if there was a certain transfer type, it would create a new cradle to grave scenario. Now what we've done is we've taken that, changed it, so now all of those calls will blend together. So you'll have one long cradle to grave scenario instead of two separate scenarios. All right. So again, I think that's all I've got here to really talk about. There's definitely a lot of other things within 25.4.1, some changes. So anybody familiar with our website, once you log into our website, you'll be able to go ahead and take a look at all of the product changes by just looking at the product change log. So once 25.4.1 comes out, if there's anything in here that you were looking for that maybe we didn't talk about today, absolutely hit our website up, go to the product change log, and you'll be able to see the additional criteria that was in 25.4.1. Trey, with that, any questions that I can answer for you?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got one about Teams DID. So they're asking, are there any plans for the ability to bulk import DID sites and bulk update existing DID blocks?
I don't know that I have anything on the agenda or roadmap that I'm aware of for that, but I would love to be able to kind of pick your brain on what you're looking for. So Trey, if we have that contact information, let's make sure we reach out and kind of get an idea of what he's looking for and see maybe where we can fit that into our design.
Gotcha. Yeah, I won't say the name publicly here, but I'll write it down.
Okay.
And you know who you are. If you're still around, please feel free to reach out. If not, we'll reach out to you. We've got one more question. Is there a way to label calls that go to voicemail rather than using system descriptor for it?
Is there a way to label calls that go to voicemail rather than using system descriptor for it? I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. I'm not sure I understand the question. So right now, when a call goes to voicemail, we automatically count that as like a summary value into voicemail. I guess maybe we're asking for a way to change that. Instead of saying voicemail, say something else. We do have the ability to kind of create some custom labels, although that's not going to change a voicemail call from being something other than voicemail. So I definitely would probably want to get a little bit more information on what you're trying to change, to know if that's something that, one, we have the capability to do within our system, or maybe what we can do, to kind of help out, what you're looking for.